Howdy. Maintaining a schedule can be very helpful to our overall well-being. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the benefits to having a schedule and the way that we can get started in tracking how we allocate our time during the day and during the week. However, I want to make sure that I acknowledge that there are many different books and approaches, strategies, and techniques about time management. And you might find them all very enlivening and beneficial. I encourage you to explore these if this is something that you think might be beneficial. However, I also want to acknowledge that these approaches can sometimes lose the forest for the trees and ultimately set such aspirational goals that we can feel, or at least I can feel, overwhelmed. And I end up just disregarding them, and you might too. And so if you're not currently keeping a daily or weekly schedule, then I encourage you to start small with some simple practices that we'll talk about here, some basic considerations about how you're allocating or investing your time, and then build upon those if that's something that you think might enhance this practice for you. But in this video, we're just going to keep it simple. So there are a couple of different reasons that having a schedule might be helpful. The first is that neurologically we respond well to consistency. Evolutionarily, we've developed or evolved to respond to or be vigilant about changes in our environment. So if there is a change, we attend to it. We become activated in some way. Too many changes, too much inconsistency, and all of a sudden we're stressing the system a little bit. So neurologically, we enjoy having a consistent schedule in a consistent environment. But this starts to extend into some other things, that having a consistent schedule then impacts our sleep, because we're going to sleep and waking up at a consistent time, and we get into a stronger or more consistent circadian rhythm. We also find that our diet becomes more consistent because we're eating similar amounts of food at similar points of time during the day. Additionally, this can mean that our exercise is probably more consistent because we're getting active at similar times on particular days throughout the course of the week. All of this is biologically helpful. There's also a cognitive benefit to having a schedule. That, for example, we can think about those things that we are looking forward to or things that we are anticipating being enjoyable. We can ultimately feel good or hopeful about the future. There's also kind of an existential aspect of this, that because we're scheduling things, we're trying to ensure that we have allocated sufficient amounts of time for activities that we value. Therefore, ensuring that we're living a life that is grounded in what we actually care about what's meaningful for us. And all of this, stuff to look forward to, enjoyable activities, meaning, this is all a form of positive reinforcement for keeping a schedule. Additionally, there's a piece of negative reinforcement, which is if we are identifying those tasks or activities that we need to complete, that maybe we feel anxious about, if we've put them into our schedule, if we've planned for them, we're more likely to accomplish them. And therefore, those bad consequences or those bad things that could happen from forgetting about them go away. And so all of a sudden we're saying, well, things are working out, so we're just going to keep doing this. Keeping a schedule has a lot of really strong benefits for us. And so let's talk about where to begin with this process. My encouragement for now is just to keep it simple. Get a planner, get a calendar. You can certainly get a planner from a store, but you can have digital planners, which are oftentimes associated with email accounts, so they could have a digital calendar that has the added benefit of being able to set alarms or reminders. Regardless, you want to have some space where you can see the hours of the day and also be able to view the week and maybe even the month from a zoomed out perspective. It's just kind of a space to start to collect your thoughts about how things are going to kind of piece together. You might consider starting with a baseline, maybe reviewing the past week or the past day to think about what you're currently doing. And maybe just write it out or type it out to get a sense of where you are currently investing your time. And this allows you a little bit of data to start working through and thinking about what you're currently doing in order to be able to adjust it. It's also possible that you could just skip this baseline and just start thinking about what you want to create moving forward. And when we think about creating a schedule for ourselves, we want to start by really inserting the big stuff, kind of the big anchors in our schedules. The first is our sleep. This is a huge part of our day, a huge part of our life. It ensures our well-being and our ability to function. Having a consistent sleep routine and a consistent number of hours that we sleep is something that goes in all of our schedules. And while there may be a little wiggle room, we are nevertheless trying to be as consistent as possible in maintaining a regular sleep routine. Similarly, the hours that we work for our job take up a particular space and time within our schedules. Now, depending upon how much you work and what type of job you work, that might shift and alter. It's going to look unique to you. However, it's helpful to be able to set boundaries around this work, around the hours that you're working, in particular when you're going to start and when you're going to stop your job. However, with the gig economy, multiple part-time jobs or working on salary means that those boundaries around our jobs can become a little more diffuse. Wherever possible, we want to try to set some boundaries around the job activity. In particular, identifying a certain number of hours that we're going to be invested in our job and when we're going to stop. What time does the workday end? We want to identify that in advance rather than allowing the work that we're doing for our job to decide when the workday will end. Now, there are times that we're going to need to adjust that in the moment, and that's okay. Maybe a deadline comes up and we need to pull an all-nighter. It happens sometimes, and it should not be the norm. But where possible, we identify beforehand these boundaries to ensure that we're setting some parameters around this and allocating sufficient time for us to engage in the rest of our lives. The last big anchor that we want to ensure is in our schedule are those activities that we engage in with friends or family, with people that we need to take care of, like children or maybe parents. And this is something that we do out of love and care, and also requires space in our schedule. And therefore, it requires us being intentional about scheduling that. Once we have those big chunks in our schedule, the sleep, the job, the family tasks and responsibilities, we can then start to identify time that is unaccounted for. Essentially, the time that falls outside of those big anchors. And particularly if we haven't set boundaries around our job, we might find that all of a sudden by setting a particular time that we finish working, we all of a sudden have this time afterwards. And so identifying that time starts to engender a sense of curiosity. Well, what are we going to do with that time? What do we prefer to do with that time? We might consider the things that we're doing now, things like scrolling on our phones or watching television or getting caught up in social media. These are certainly things that I've found myself getting wrapped up in. And I've also found a number of the people that I work with getting caught in the scroll. And so we're faced with this wonder of, well, what would we prefer? Or what do we want to put in these pockets of time? And it opens up these questions about what activities do we want to bring into our lives? What activities define our lives? We can consider our serious leisure pursuits, those things that we engage in that require consistent focus and pursuit over time, things like music and art and theater, maybe learning a new language, writing a book, playing on a sports team, quilting, tinkering with things, whatever it may be, it reflects some sort of passion that we have to pursue in a particular area. And allowing, or rather allocating time for that ensures that we are investing ourselves in meaningful activities. And we really want to focus on those serious leisure pursuits over the more passive forms of leisure, like watching television. Though there's nothing bad about a little television in our lives. We also might consider different areas of wellness that we might want to bring into those spaces in our schedule. Things like physical wellness, so exercise and diet, social wellness, connecting with friends and family, emotional wellness, opportunities to maybe journal or reflect on what's going on for us, intellectual wellness, engaging in some deep inquiry about particular topics that excite us, or being creative, in spiritual wellness, maintaining that connection to a larger sense of identity and purpose within the world. Different types of activities may feed these different types of wellness, and so therefore we want to make sure that there's room in our schedule. And after all this, it might be a point in time to kind of step back and look at our schedule for the week and say that, gosh, there's a lot that I want to do. And there's hopefully a lot of time to do these things. But it comes down to moving things around in our schedule, about making some intentional decisions. We don't make time for activities. We take time for activities, which means we need to take it from other things. I hope that just putting this schedule together for yourself to think about how you're investing your time is enlightening, that it starts to get you thinking about how you want to live your life. But there are a couple of final considerations that aren't as complex as some of those time management strategies, but are just some general things to think about as you're putting this together. The first thing to consider is the community and systems in which you live. To think about a spouse, to think about parents, to think about children or roommates or friends that you live with. To consider the ways or areas of your lives that overlap or connect those shared activities. Your schedule then doesn't exist in isolation, that this is a negotiation or a conversation with loved ones. Talk with them about their plans. Talk to them about your plans. See how they start to connect and overlap. The second is to neither plan for nor deny spontaneity. If we allocate time to say that we're going to be spontaneous, this puts a little pressure on the creative process, which actually might stifle inspiration. It also is not really in the spirit of spontaneity. Instead, having a planned activity and then finding inspiration in the moment, being spontaneous and changing those plans is a preferable approach. If you decide to abandon your plans to go do something that sounds exciting, that's wonderful. And by all means, go do that if your schedule allows. But just because I schedule to read a book for fun doesn't mean that I actually need to read that book for fun. It's just kind of the baseline. It's something I can go back to. Like, well, I plan to read this for fun. If I'm not finding it fun and I feel like something else is going to be more fun, then yeah, I can go do this other thing. And that's okay. But don't plan to be spontaneous. Instead, make a plan, look forward to enacting that plan, and then if something comes up, go with it. The third consideration is to think about that morning time between waking up and getting to your job, as well as the evening time, that 30 to 45 minutes before we get into bed. Both of these are a part of good sleep hygiene, but it's also a part of living our lives. And using that time in a meaningful way can be really helpful. So between waking up and starting our job, we want to think about waking up into our lives instead of waking up into our jobs. And so I encourage you to think about how you can allocate at least a certain amount of time to doing something that you want to do. Maybe something for fun, maybe something that you find inspiring, maybe something that you find meaningful, so that you're not just running from your bed to your job, but running from your bed to your life, and then maybe to your job, which is a part of your life. I encourage you to think about adding something fun to that morning schedule, just as an experiment. So too, that 30 to 45 minutes before bed, as you're starting to wind down, we want to think about calming ourselves, grounding ourselves, and preparing ourselves for sleep. And so again, thinking about what you might do in that space, in that time, putting it in your planner, but what activities would be entailed in that nighttime routine. And in a similar way to the morning routine, I encourage you to think about the nighttime and say, what is one thing that you could do to help yourself calm down and relax before you get into bed? And the final consideration is reflective of maybe the spontaneity, which is take your schedule, take your planner seriously, and don't take it too seriously. Having a plan doesn't mean that you have to keep the plan all the time, and it's okay to shift. It's okay to move things around. I find that for myself, some of my favorite moments are when I have a plan, I'm looking forward to it, and then I break that plan for something that I would prefer to do instead, maybe something that emerged organically in my day. It doesn't negate the plan. It doesn't say that I shouldn't have a plan to begin with. Rather, it just affirms my creativity and my autonomy as a human being. And as you start to get a sense of how you keep your schedule, as you start to get more data about what's working for you at different times during different days, you might find that you want to alter things, make some tweaks, zhuzh some things, move something from here to here because you focus a little bit more. Experiment with this. Take it seriously, but also allow yourself to break it, to move it around, to adjust as you need. Because having one schedule to fit everyone just doesn't work. So explore what works for you. And if you find that this approach is working for you, you might dive into some of those advanced time management techniques. But I find that most folks get enough from this practice. Just being able to set up a schedule, a consistent plan, to think about things in advance helps ground them in the life that they're living, helps give them a sense of structure. And that's usually all we need. Thanks for taking the time to watch this, and I wish you well on your scheduling and planning adventures.